All right, Pastor Mark here with Graham Allen, and thank you for joining me. And I wanted to just delve a little bit into politics, heat of election on the horizon. For those Christians that seem to think the election's it, that's going to bring awakening to America. If we get the right candidate, we can save the culture. If our candidate wins, then that's going to be the thing that changes everything. And they're sort of hinging a lot of their hopes and dreams and aspirations on the election. What would you say to those people?
I would say the answer is no, that's not true at all. And you know, people that come from my world, that's the conservative pundit world and things like that, that's very taboo to say. You don't say those kind of things. First and foremost, the election, even if it goes, you say Donald Trump is your guy. I know for a fact that Trump's camp is very concerned about the House and the Senate. It's more likely than not we're going to lose the House and the Senate, which will render Trump completely unable to do anything.
It's just going to be head-on collision every single issue.
Correct. So at best, you know, you're looking at perhaps a stalling of the deterioration, maybe. But my biggest fear is no matter what happens, I think the country burns, either literally or metaphorically. I think that if Donald Trump wins, I think, you know, we saw back in 2020 what happened, the BLM riots. We saw all these things. We know what one side is willing to do, and I think that if Donald Trump loses in a way like he did in 2020, I think that you're going to see a lot of states at that point. I think it's going to get real ugly really quick. I think it's possible that you'll have some states have a vote of non-confidence in the government. And I think you saw the states join with Texas when Texas was like, we're doing this thing at the border, whether you want to do it or not. I think that was a framework of potential states that would be like, we're done, we're out. I think that it is a very real possibility that November is the last election as we currently know it. I think that's a real possibility.
So what would you say to the Christians, though, that they really are hanging their hopes on government instead of God, and on elections instead of evangelisms? And I mean, do you honestly think that there's anything potentially stemming the cultural decline and decay, the freefall that we're in, apart from people repenting of sin, receiving Jesus Christ, and a reset in the human soul?
I mean, do I think it's possible to stop the free fall? No, because like we just talked about earlier, we all know how this ends, and it gets worse before Jesus comes back. I think we as Christians have to look at the fact that it's only going to get worse, and we need to start preparing to be ready for what's coming. And by preparing, I don't just mean like, oh, we have to get ready with guns and all this other stuff. I'm talking about preparing ourselves spiritually as well. I'm talking about the actual other battle, that is reaching as many souls as possible to change their eternal destination as possible. I think we as a church, we have an opportunity here. We have an opportunity because there's going to be a lot of people that are confused, a lot of lost souls, a lot of people wandering around. A lot of fear and anxiety. A lot of fear and anxiety. And we have an opportunity to be the actual church for once. Yeah. You know, we had a chance in 2020 and 99.8% of churches failed that test. I think we're going to get another test here in about, 7 months, something like that, or in November, however far along that is. We're going to have another opportunity here as a church, and I think that's the reality of where we're actually headed. And I encourage pastors and churches or churchgoers that are kind of in this head in the sand, I'm just going to read my Bible and mind my own business. Yeah,
let's talk about on the flip side. Those Christians are like, we avoid culture, we avoid politics. On one side, you've got sort of a religious commitment to the political process that is unhealthy, and all of a sudden politicians are saviors, and nations are the kingdom of God, and they've got a misperception. On the flip side, there are many that would say, I'm out. I don't engage politically. I don't engage culturally. The system is corrupt to the core. There's no stalling, the inevitable decline of the culture. What would you say to those Christians that are I'm just praying and reading my Bible and not engaged and not involved and just assuming that it sorts itself out?
Well, in my own opinion, I don't find that to be a biblical thing to do. I don't find sitting idly by with things that churches now want to put into the political category, and they only want to do that so they feel like they have a reason not to talk about it. There are things that are obvious moral and biblical issues, spiritual issues, that we're moving into political issues to not have to talk about.
Abortion,
transgender ideology,
mutilation of children, parents' rights, school choice.
Sexualization of our kids, even if it's not transgenderism, just sexualization. These are moral issues. I tell everybody all the time, I have a hard time. When I read the Bible, I do see Jesus, and I do see Jesus as a Savior who cares and is full of grace. But I also see Jesus as a person that tells the truth. And oftentimes, more often than not, people love the truth until somebody tells the truth about you. And then all of a sudden it stings and it hurts a little bit. Jesus, when I read the Bible, Jesus didn't care about feelings first. He cared about their soul first. And sometimes that didn't always sit well with people. But oftentimes when the soul becomes aligned, the feelings become aligned along with it.
Yeah.
And so I always make kind of a joke, but kind of a real thing. Jesus didn't care about your feelings more than he cares about your soul.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we lose face value with. I have a hard time believing that in today's society, that Jesus would stand alongside the road where they're having a naked men riding bikes around the street in a parade, and Jesus just goes, "Oh, okay, that's okay. I love everybody."
It's Tuesday.
Yeah, it's
on the West Coast.
Yeah. I don't want to get involved in that because, separation of church and state and all this stuff. No, the answer to that is no. I find it hard to believe that Jesus, if he was alive, would be...
He is alive.
Well, yes. When he was here physically, before death, burial, resurrection, I just have a hard time believing Jesus would stand idly by when, a child is being talked into puberty blockers and genital mutilation and all these things. The answer would be no. Yeah. Jesus would absolutely not, especially the fact that Jesus makes it known in scriptures how much he cared about children. There's no way. Jesus would be, again, he would be flipping tables. He would be doing what he needed to do. Mm-hmm. And even people who don't believe in Jesus. Ben Shapiro made a comment the other day. We all know he's a practicing Orthodox Jew. He made a comment. He said that Jesus was a political activist and they eventually killed him for it.
Well, he did get murdered by the government.
Yeah, correct. But even that statement that even the Jews think that Jesus got into politics and he confronted politics and things that were wrong. As Christians, we can't ignore that either. Absolutely he did. He said, no, that's not right. No, it's not. Nope, we can't do it that way. Nope, you know what, you're wrong, blah, 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 blah. And Jesus had no problems with correcting when correcting needed to be done because he cared about the soul more than the feelings. And not that he didn't care about feelings at all, but which one was more important? And I think we're at a point in the church where we want to love people so much that we're actually hurting them by not telling them the truth. And if all you do is love or grace with no truth, well, you're an enabler. And if all you are is truth, well, you're a dictator and you have trauma. And so, of course, we'll never mirror it as perfect as Jesus did. But the Bible gives us a very clear thing, and especially with people that proclaim to be Christians. You always hear the don't judge, and this and that, don't judge me and whatnot. But the Bible's actually very clear with people that proclaim to be Christians. Well, no, that's not actually how it goes.
Yeah, and you need to have discernment.
Correct.
So what would you say, because what we're seeing, and I'm sure this is what you're saying, that is that it seems like we're in a generational apostasy. And for genuine Bible-believing Christians, it's getting harder and harder to actually find a church because the soft center of evangelicalism, or whatever remains of it, now is soft woke.
Yes.
So hard woke is like the transgender bishop, who came out of Satan's closet wearing the rainbow, burqa.
Yep.
And But then there's the soft woke, and the soft woke is what's dominating evangelicalism, and it seems to be pastors that don't like controversy, they don't want to have conflict, they don't want to alienate anyone in their potential congregation, and also they seem to think that there's a way for us to accommodate certain things that are just frankly wrong to a degree that we won't get in trouble, and that maybe now people will feel like they can come to church and that it's a safe space for them. So, I mean, how bad do you think the soft woke problem is in the evangelical church?
I mean, if I had to guess a percentage, I would say at least 90%. Yeah,
it's what they won't talk about too. Like, I mean, they won't talk about abortion. It's like, man, the life of children. If that's not an issue that relates to God, I don't know what does.
Correct.
And so, the soft woke churches is what they won't talk about. And also, I think what it causes for the Christians who attend those churches, in the name of being sensitive to unbelievers, you become insensitive to believers.
Right.
All of a sudden, the church starts to feel like a place that you're not sure you want to be with your kids, because the church hasn't differentiated itself enough from the world that you can actually have a healthy environment for your family. And I think that's a massive crisis. And unless you're willing to deal with some of the political issues and draw some of those lines, I'm not even sure the average Christian feels, like they should even be in the church, because the church isn't the place that really speaks for God.
Right. Well, I agree. And my answer to that is just preach the Bible. Just preach the Bible, and the Bible is going to help you discern, okay, yes, that needs to be talked about, and that needs to be addressed. I can't tell you how many of these mega pastors on the Sunday after Roe v. Wade was repealed didn't even mention a word, and they went right into their sixth part of their series of, how to make your wife happier in your marriage and things like that, which is great. I'm not saying that those series aren't warranted, but to be so tone deaf of where we are in our country, and a massive win for the lives of children, to me that spoke volumes. But those same pastors said things about George Floyd. Those same pastors said things about, the BLM riots. And I sat there one time, and I went to a church, and it was Father's Day. And the Sunday before that, they challenged all the fathers to come in there. And I've seen your Real Men event, and I've seen how powerful it is, but there's dads that are hurting out there, that are, they're barely walking in, man. Like, they're barely getting in there. They're dragging themselves in there because they need to hear something. And Father's Day fell on June 19th. And I watched them, say, "Hey, fathers, good job," for 30 seconds. And then for 15 minutes of the service, they were talking about how that afternoon they were going to have this big grill out for Juneteenth and all this other stuff. And I'm just sitting there going, that's the most divisive, racially political thing that you could possibly do. You have any idea what knows no skin color of it? Fathers. Mm-hmm. Fathers. That's what you could have talked about. You could have talked about fathers, because that's relevant. And that's what people actually need to hear, and what people actually care about. And so I think that a lot of pastors need a gut check. And you can say that in the way that I just said it. I don't feel like I said it like I was yelling at anyone. I don't feel like I said it like I was rebuking anyone. But correction is needed. And as Christians, we should all be willing to be corrected when need be. And there's a lot of pastors that view that as, oh, well, you're this rogue person, or you're this incendiary, divisive person, or are you just do you just mold to whatever your congregation, what you think gets the most money in the plate?
Well, and if you are pandering to a constituency, you're a politician.
Yeah, that's what it is.
You've stopped that prophetic function of saying, here's what God says, and instead it's poll numbers, approval ratings, and maintaining your office by messaging to your constituency.
Yeah, so I've heard some pastors say it like this, and I think it's a really good analogy. A lot of pastors have gone to influence versus spiritual authority. And influence, what that does is it makes you popular. People will show up, and people will give. As long as you do exactly what they're expecting you to do, it's kind of like this dance puppet mentality. Do what we paid you to do, like say what we paid you to say. Whereas spiritual authority is people show up because you say what the Lord told you to say. And then you answer to God and what God is telling you to say to the congregation in that moment. And I think you have a lot of pastors that have fallen victim to this superstar, king of the castle mentality. Everybody loves them. Everybody wants to stand in line to meet them. They've got, 6 security guards that surround them, and they go through this special green screen room where nobody can see them come in or out. And, all they want to know is what were the numbers in, what were the numbers saved, how many people text the word saved to blah, 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 and how much money was tithed. Oh, we had a dip. Oh, well, what did people not like that I say? Oh, okay, people didn't like this. Okay, we won't talk about that anymore. And that's the difference between, in my opinion, pastors that are doing what the Lord is telling them to do versus they're trying to run a business.
Well, and I find that God only anoints that which he appoints. So if God says say or do something, I believe there's a Holy Spirit anointing on that is the X factor that enables an authority and power that otherwise isn't possible or present. Mm-hmm. And so really, if you're going to be a leader, it really is requiring another level of faith. And that is, if I say and do what the Lord has asked me to say and do, I'm going to trust the Lord to show up and figure it out.
Yeah.
And the pastors that have that courage, I think their people trust them. They're like, you know what? I think when the hard time comes, they're gonna call the shot. They're gonna take the shot. And I do think for a lot of Christians, what we're seeing even going on nationally, historic decline in church attendance. And there's this sort of, narrative. Christians have stopped going to church. Well, what if the church left them?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that they're like, I was going to a church and I didn't leave the church. The church left me.
Right.
They're doing BLM. You're like, for gosh sakes, just read the original mission statement. They hate God. They hate heterosexual couples. They hate marriage. They hate men.
Yeah.
They hate family. So nice slogan, but demonic content.
Correct.
When it comes to the transgender issue, there's a lot of churches that they're not willing to say anything. And their people are confused.
Yeah.
And younger generations don't even know that there is a line.
Yeah.
And so, I think as the church veers down into the left, which is horrible to see, and I think as politics really becomes, it becomes a false place of hope if you're thinking that politics is the solution and not the problem.
Yeah. No. And I think it even goes to people outside of the church, the non-believers, the people that people have been inviting to church for forever. They see the hypocrisy more than oftentimes churchgoers see it. They see it. Mm-hmm. And they're waiting on pastors. There's no real way pastors are okay with what's going on here. And they're waiting to hear them say something, but then they don't. And then that's their thing. See there? That's why. That's mm-hmm. why I won't go to a church right there, because any sane human being knows that children shouldn't be mutilating their genitals. Any sane human being knows you shouldn't be murdering babies, especially late term and even sometimes post-birth abortion, which is infanticide. Any sane human being knows that you shouldn't be teaching sexual positions to high schoolers in school.
Well, to kindergartners, we're starting to sexualize them.
Yes, every sane human being knows that. And they're looking at the church going, why aren't the pastors saying anything about this? And that's just giving them more and more ammunition against the church in and of itself. That's leading more and more people who haven't given their life to Christ away from Christ, because they're like, yeah, I've read some Bible and I've heard about this Jesus guy, and I just have a hard time believing that he would be okay with, Six Flags over Jesus over here, that, not talking about any of this stuff. And I think that you see that happening. More and more people have more access to information than ever before. More and more people are reading Bibles. More and more people are learning about the Lord on their own. And because deep down, we're all searching for this connection to our Father. Deep down, we all are. We don't know it half the time, but more and more people there are non-churchgoers that know the Bible better than the pastors do.
Well, it is really fascinating that even people that don't like church and don't know Jesus there seems to be an increasing interest in the Bible, which to me is this magnificent opportunity to do what I love to do, and that is just open it and just go through it and just let it set the agenda.
Correct.
Like if you go through a book of the Bible or a chunk of the book of the Bible, you're going to hit all of the cultural issues. And anybody who says, well, we shouldn't get into politics, it's like, if you're going to preach through books of the Bible, you're going to hit a ton of political issues. You go to Nehemiah, what are they doing? They're building a wall to secure their border. There's a whole book of the Bible.
Yeah.
You go to Exodus and they're murdering babies.
Yeah.
You go to Herod and he's murdering babies. I mean, it's impossible to avoid the issues if you just go through books of the Bible and if you stick close to the scriptures. And so as wild and as weird as it is, we may be entering into this day when the weirdo, the outlier, the rebel is just the person who opens the Bible, goes through it, lets it set the agenda, and tells the truth.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I agree 100%, but I also think it's a mindset shift where I'm not necessarily saying that churches and pastors should deliberately every service go to try to run into politics. But if politics runs into us as the church, then we shouldn't try to bob and weave and avoid it. We should face it head on.
Yeah, and it's kind of like driving a car. Like, if you're in your lane, I'm not going to sideswipe you. But if you get into my lane, I'm going to hit the horn.
Exactly.
And right now, what you have the government in the lane of the church. You have the government in the lane of the family. You have the government in the lane of the parents. And and if Christian leaders aren't like, hey, this is not your lane. God didn't give children to governments. He gave them to parents. The best person to determine, the gender of your child is not some, 25-year-old girl who went to college and didn't have a child. She doesn't know anything about parenting. She may have a degree in, sexualization of children and mental health, but she's 25 and she's not the mother and she doesn't have a child and it's not her damn business. Yeah. And so what we've done is we have abdicated a lot of authority, and once the government veers into your lane, they don't want to get out. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of this started, and then I'll ask you one question, we'll close, but I feel like a lot of this really started during COVID. And it was just like, all of a sudden the church is like, we will just shut down.
We'll just do whatever you say.
We'll do whatever you say. Yep. It's like, well, why is the abortion clinic open? And why is the weed store open? And why is the strip club still going? You're like, well, they're essential. Yeah. You're like, okay, and worship isn't. And so even in those moments.
Do you think money played a major part in that, more than fear for churches?
I think, well, the government was willing to fund you, but I think ultimately at the end of the day, I think the church didn't come to the realization that when people needed the church the most of the churches were closed. Yeah. And to me, it's like, okay, let's say there is this generational crisis and there's this anxiety and fear and we don't know what's going to happen. And it's this sort of, we had a lot of false prophets prophesying an apocalypse that didn't happen. And in those moments, it's like people need church. They need God. They need community. They need prayer. They need Bible teaching. They need normal. And for the churches that said, sorry, we are going to be closed because we want to be on good terms with the government. Yeah. I mean, I think at that point, the church lost a lot of its courage, but it also lost a lot of its trust.
You know what it reminds me of? And I'm a movie guy, and I think this is a really good analogy. Pastors here today live in such fear. You ever seen the movie Titanic? You ever seen that movie?
I don't. Probably a long time ago.
Okay, there's a scene in the Titanic about the boat going down. There's a scene in the movie Titanic where the boat's going down.
It's got Leonardo DiCaprio, right?
Correct.
That's why I didn't watch it.
Yes. There's a scene in the movie Titanic where the boat's going down. It's going down. The people are going to die. They know it. And there's a pastor right there the whole time praying with people, leading them to salvation, and in the final moments dying off. Okay, that was a real pastor. That was a real shepherd. That was a real person that believed in eternal life and something bigger than himself. Pastors today would be the guys that were trying to pretend they had kids to get on the boat first. Because, they need to live because they got to pray for the people that make it past this thing. That's a problem that we have in today's society. There's a scene in the movie The Patriot where they're going through these towns and they're trying to find more people to show, to come and join the guerrilla style units that were going in there to defeat the British. And at the very end, they're leaving this town. The pastor walks out with a musket over his shoulder and like, what are you doing? Like, you're the pastor. And he goes, sometimes the shepherd's got to defend his flock. Mm-hmm. Today, they'd be hiding out behind the women and children and things like that, because right now we need warriors, and we need people that actually believe in what they're preaching. And if we believed in what we were preaching, all those churches wouldn't have shut down. If we believed in what we were preaching, none of these pastors would be worried about talking about these things that are so blatantly biblical, moral issues that it would be a no-brainer. If we had pastors like that today, more pastors like that today, the church would be in a really good place. And so I believe that in 2020, this is my own personal belief, you can think I'm crazy or whatnot, I believe in 2020, the church had a massive opportunity, and for the mass majority of churches, they botched it. And I believe that God said, okay, I got it. I'm going to now call all these other people, these next people that were the ones that nobody would anticipate. Why am I here today? Lord only knows. And there's other people just like me. They're going to look different. They're going to sound different. They're not going to look the way that we've constructed pastors are supposed to look. They're not going to talk the way we've constructed pastors are supposed to talk. They're going to preach the truth, even if it makes people upset, because we worry more about their soul. We worry about their soul first, and then their feelings next. And that's not saying be mean to people, but tell people the truth. And I think that the Lord is calling a new wave of pastors, evangelists, missionaries across the board. And here very soon, I think that the status quo is going to shift. I really do.
Yeah, and I'll close this. So there was an article, I sent it to you from Ren. It was in First Things. Yep. And he talks about the three worlds of evangelicalism. And he says, first there was positive world. Well, to be a pastor or a leader in positive world where people think well of church, and you're supposed to go to church and get married in church, and you can't really run for office unless you say I believe in God and I go to this church.
Of the church. Yeah.
And so in positive world, you didn't need to have an evangelistic heart, and you didn't need to be very courageous, and you didn't need to be very tough.
Yeah.
It's peacetime. And then he said, then there was a neutral world. And neutral world was, it didn't help you if you go to church, didn't really hurt you. You could run for office and you didn't have to pretend like you were a believer. It didn't help or hinder you. People were just sort of indifferent. Where we're at now, and I agree with him, is negative world. And that is that the view of Christianity and the church, but especially the Bible, is that it's not just wrong, it's evil.
Yeah.
And so the Bible is an evil book, and people who subscribe to biblical values, those are dangerous and those are horrible people. And so to be a pastor in negative world means you're always at war. In positive world, pastor never had a lot of conflict. In neutral world, a little bit of conflict. Negative world, you're going to have conflict a lot. You're going to be criticized a lot. You're going to be attacked a lot. The cancel culture is going to come for you repeatedly. And I do believe that most Christian leaders, including pastors and those running networks and denominations and Bible colleges and seminaries, they grew up in positive world. They were trained for ministry in positive world. They think that somehow we may be living in neutral world because they're distant from reality. And their training and preparation was like getting prepared to be in the Salvation Army versus the real army.
Yeah.
You're good at, ringing a bell and holding a bucket. But if a war came, the Salvation Army isn't really going to be first to the fight.
Right.
And so I think what you're saying is right. I think we're going to have to see soldiers, people that have a political background or a business background or a military combat background, or people that just went through a lot of hardship in life and have a thick skin, but still have a tender heart going into ministry and leading. Otherwise, it's just continual compromise.
Yeah.
And the unwillingness to have the conflict means that you just keep surrendering. And there's no way to advance the kingdom of God if all you're really good at is waving white flags and apologizing.
Right.
And so, and for me, the entire issue of the election is to think that you can't solve spiritual problems with elections.
Yeah. You can't place your trust fully in corruptible men, because all men can be corruptible.
So this will be my last question. So how corrupt is government?
If I had to do a quick guess, just round numbers, 99%. I do think that there is 1% of people that actually go there thinking that they can make a difference, and they either A, get kicked out, forced out, primaried, all this other kind of stuff. B, they get blackmailed somehow, some way, they fall in some situations, or B, money. That's what I think. The truly good ones don't last very long. They do 1, maybe 2 terms, and they're out, and they move on to different things because they realize very quickly that here's some insider baseball for you. Just pure. This is how corrupt government is. And I know this. I won't say which congressman it was, but I know this through many meetings. When you show up your first day, oh, congratulations, you're a new congressman, congresswoman, fantastic. I'm the House Majority Leader, this is the House Minority Leader. They do the same thing in the Senate. Here's your pen. Everybody's seen the little pens they wear. Well, what most people don't know is on the back of those pens are numbers, and they rank you on how important they think you are or how unimportant they think you are the very first day you get in. And that's on the back of every one of our congressmen, congresswomen, senators, little lapel pins is a number of which way they think they are. And I'll give you one more thing to prove what you're talking about. This is how little government and politics respects the church. When I ran for Congress, I asked the question, do I need to start going to the churches and get the churches' endorsements or approvals and things like that? And verbatim, they said, churches are worthless. Churches don't matter. You don't need them. It is an absolute waste of time for you to even step foot into a church. And they said, not only because it doesn't matter, but 70% of the church doesn't vote. That's how little the government and politics thinks about the church. And the problem and the scariest thing is they're not wrong, and the church needs to do something about it.
Well, let's leave it there. Thanks for your time, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.